My guest today is C. Paul Smith, the author of The Fetal Right to Life Argument. He has a general law practice in Maryland for over 40 years and has been an elected official in Frederick County, Maryland. He is also the author of 4 books, and today we are discussing The Fetal Right to Life Argument. So let's welcome Mr. C. Paul Smith. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Dr. Ward.
Well, let's start off with something because we need to educate the people because this is a very strong, deep subject across this nation. And many people do not know what the 1973 Supreme Court case Roe versus Wade was actually about. Can you explain it to us?
Yes, you're exactly right. That was, 48 years ago when the court decided Roe v. Wade. It is basically known for giving women the right to an abortion. And that's pretty much the general understanding of it. But it's quite a bit more complicated than that. And this topic is important because it continues to be a topic that is polarizing. It's important today. There's one major Supreme Court case now before the Supreme Court that will be decided probably early next year. There will be oral arguments December 1st. So I've just found people do not understand the Roe v. Wade decision very well. It's kind of superficial what people know.
Well, what was actually decided by the court in 1973?
What happened, a woman down there did not like the Texas law, which prohibited her from getting an abortion, and the case went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court invalidated the Texas law and said that a woman has a right to privacy, a right to control her own body. That was wonderful, a great part of that ruling, in my opinion. But the Supreme Court also said there is no fetal right to life, even though most of the states recognized a fetal right to life. And that part of the decision, I think, was terrible. I was a law student at the time. I did a paper that turned into a book in 1977, The Fetal Right to Life Argument. Now, after 40 some years of practice, I reread the book and I said, my goodness, that was pretty good, and it's still pertinent. So anyway, that's in a nutshell what the book is.
Well, with Roe versus Wade coming out of Texas, and now it's coming back to Texas again with what has transpired in the state from Governor Greg Abbott, and now the whole country, maybe the liberal side of the country, is in a complete uproar. And you've written that the flaws in the Roe decision could be remedied with a fetal right to life amendment to the Constitution. Explain that.
Yes, you said a couple of things. First of all, what's pending right now is a case from Mississippi, Jackson Women's Health Organization. That's the case that the Supreme Court will hear on December 1st, and they will resolve it sometime early next year, we think. The Texas case, the court declined to review a Texas case, meaning they're not going to hear it now, but it's going to have to go through the review process through the Circuit Court of Appeals. And that law in Texas prohibits abortions as early as 6 weeks into pregnancy and has no exception for rape or incest, and also gives third parties the right to enforce it. So that case is working its way through.
So is the Texas case, a lot of people were talking about that it was the Texas case that could cause the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade. Do you see that happening?
Well, I think that's premature. The court really declined to hear the Texas case for now. Yeah, and I've heard people say exactly what you said. The interesting thing in the Mississippi case, Mississippi had a law that allowed states to prohibit abortion as early as 15 weeks into the pregnancy. Now, previously, states have been able to prohibit abortion once the fetus becomes viable. That's about 24 weeks. So this is a substantial change if the court upholds the Mississippi law. The interesting thing about this case is something very interesting. First of all, it took the Supreme Court a full year before they decided to take the case. That is extremely unusual. And to me, it indicates, I think the court plans to make a change, or they would not have taken the case. They took it about the time they had a solid conservative majority. So I think that indicates there may be a change. A lot of people argue that the court is going to overturn Roe. I find those types of arguments kind of superficial. There's no way the court is going to eliminate the woman's right to control her body. I mean, that was important, and I don't hear anybody arguing to do that. So if they recognized a fetal right to life, whoa, that would be pretty significant. And I actually hope they will. But I think they're more likely just to extend the time back to maybe closer to 15 weeks when a state can protect potential human life.
So the Texas version of 6 weeks, are you saying that's too early?
No, I'm not personally saying it's too early. But the case is not before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court recently ruled on that, denied the petition to take the case, which will require it to go through the appellate process before it gets to the court.
And that was really the only reason why they declined to hear the case, because they wanted it to go through the lower courts first before it actually came to them.
I think so. You know, there actually are other abortion cases that are making their way up to the court, too. There's a Missouri case and an Arizona case that where states have prohibited people from aborting someone based on it being a Down syndrome baby or having cystic fibrosis. So those cases are making their way through.
Well,
So
does that make the abortion issue even more complicated? You know, from Down syndrome, cystic fibrosis, then there's rape and incest. It seems like this is a subject that is polarizing America, and it has for the last almost 50 years. Everybody talks about it. The media creates their own narratives about it. So a lot of people really don't know the full truth in what they hear. It's more of personal opinion instead of based on fact. Is that why you actually wrote a book about Roe versus Wade?
Yes, that is one reason. The discussion is so superficial. And we just talk about whether or not they're going to overturn Roe. And if they're very unlikely to do that. They'll make some minor tweak in it. So that I think the book would be very helpful. The Roe v. Wade is probably the most significant Supreme Court case in the last 50 years. It has affected many aspects of our law.
Well, what about this case actually drew you to it? What was the major interest for you?
Well, I became interested as a law student. I started law school, I think it was 75, I believe. But I did a paper on this case because it was very interesting then, extremely sort of a hot issue. And I went through it and I said, my goodness, that was a terrible decision. As a law student, I wrote my paper. Now I go back 40 years later and I said, yeah, I was right in my criticism. And actually, I've come out stronger against the Supreme Court. They did not use good, sound legal reasoning. It was basically an edict. It was politically based, but it was not a good decision legally, as well as I personally disagree with the decision. It was an example of what we call judicial legislation.
And that
continues to be a hot issue today.
Yeah, and that's actually becoming a major issue now, where the Supreme Court is becoming more political when it needs to be completely unbiased. But of course, I think it doesn't matter which administration is in office. Each administration wants to get the court to kind of lean in a particular way. I mean, I can understand that. That's what politics are all about. It's not about finding middle ground. It's trying to find out, can I beat everybody else around me? And the Supreme Court is now becoming so political for the members of the court themselves. Is it harder for them to actually make an unbiased decision because there's so much pressure behind the scenes in the political realm?
Well, I think you're right. I I'm personally a conservative, and I believe the Supreme Court, they should not inject their personal views. They should really stick to what the law would require. Um, and and so if a conservative is true to that, it actually puts the conservatives at a little bit of disadvantage, because in my view, the liberals, that is not their view. They just want to enact their agenda. I mean, that's my conclusion, but I've read many Supreme Court cases, and I look at them and I see the opinions they make sometimes, and it sounds so logical on the surface, but I said, my goodness, you've said these words, but you're just putting your own views in.
Yeah,
So,
well, Mr.
no, go
Smith,
ahead.
let me ask you this. How can the nation or the court, um, even from the state level to the federal level, how is there a balance between giving the woman to have the right to her own body and what she wants to do with it, and then also finding what the fetal's right is? Is there a balance there? Is there common ground that can be met where both sides are happy?
Well, that's an excellent question. I want to show you the cover of my book. I have a scale. Let's see, where is it? There we go. I have a scale in the hand. And frankly, I think that is what needs to happen. The fetal right to life has to be balanced with the woman's right to control her body. So legally, I believe that if a woman is pregnant because of rape, which was a violation of her rights, uh, I think her right should prevail over that of the fetus if there's a conflict. I mean, that's my view. Not all right to lifers like that, but legally, I think that's probably what should happen. And right now, they don't even do a balancing. The Supreme Court has eliminated that from litigation. They said a state can begin to protect potential human life once the baby is viable, but they never. And that's kind of a balancing act there. But other than that, there's no balancing. I think there should be balancing. It complicates the law if that's the case, but I think that's what should happen.
Yeah, I agree. There has to be a balance in this because there are so many different factors, and you already you named four of them. I mean, people look at, if once the woman has conceived, then as time goes by, they go to the OBGYN. Is my baby healthy? Is there a genetic problem? Is there cystic fibrosis? So then right then and there, the doctor is giving the patient the right to choose, what do you want to do? And sometimes the doctors kind of push and say, hey, you may want to terminate this pregnancy. I know that there have been husband and wives who said, no, we're not going to do that. We love this child as it is. And I commend them for that, because that's a very major decision. So you have the doctor saying one thing, and then you have in the court saying and allowing something. I have interviewed ex-Planned Parenthood whistleblowers on this program before, and I know what happens behind the scenes of that institution, which should scare everybody in America. And you have all of these factors talking about one issue, and I can see why the court has such a major problem on their hands.
I I think you're exactly right. And if the court were to recognize a fetal right to life, which I think it should, I think the ultimate effect isn't going to be much different from what we're dealing with now. In other words, the Mississippi case says, well, can we prohibit abortion beginning 15 weeks? And you got to weigh the two rights. So that would complicate things legally, but my goodness, when you recognize that at what 12 weeks the baby has a heartbeat. I read something about a baby smiling at that point. I mean, there is a human being in there, and golly, if there's human life, it seems there should be a right to life. And so, in addition to my book telling about the case, I actually come down very strongly. I don't know if we'll ever change it, but it's really an abomination. And we need to recognize how bad it is. If we just go along and pretend it's okay what they did, that's just not right. We may not be able to change it, but it really is not good.
Yeah, and I think the media is one of the ones that play a huge role in the narrative because let's say, all right, so we have the law in the books right now. It's Roe v. Wade. But then you have the state of Mississippi, you have Missouri, you have Texas, and all of a sudden people go, but what about this? What about that? And then it continues to complicate the matter, but it complicates, I think, the public's view as to what is really going on. If I went out on the street right now with a microphone and asked 20 people, what is Roe v. Wade? What is that case? What is it about? And they'll only say one word, abortion, but they can't explain what that actually means. Because most people today, like you said, 48 years later, they don't have a clue what Roe v. Wade actually means and what's actually in the law, which is why we've been still fighting about it for the last 48 years.
You know, this case illustrates one of the problems we have today where everybody kind of knows about Roe v. Wade, but the underlying knowledge of it is really very superficial. And it really would help if people understood the case better so that we'd have more meaningful discussions, both in the press and elsewhere. So I think the book helps that. I think one way or the other, whoever reads it will be fascinated by it. It has affected the changes in same-sex marriage, and the whole area of family law has been affected by this. It used to be that the state would control divorce and different aspects of family law. Roe v. Wade kind of usurped that, and so that has caused a change. So it's a complicated case.
Well, then, with your book, The Fetal Right to Life Argument, can you break down for us your book in the way that you basically categorized or did the chapters within the book? So when the reader buys your book, what are they going to expect to see?
Yes, I can do that. So the first part, I just described the decision and explained the basic parts, some of which we've talked about. One of the chapters, I go into the United States Civil Rights Commission that in the mid 70s issued a report opposing the Fetal Right to Life amendments. There were several that were before Congress. I was infuriated by that, and everyone should be. It was so biased, and I take the Civil Rights Commission apart. I also talk about the recent Supreme Court changes. The Casey case established that either a father or a spouse or a child do not need parental consent, or the woman doesn't need spousal consent for abortion. That was in 76. The 89 Webster case said that it's the viability point. That's when a state can begin to prohibit abortions. Originally, the Supreme Court established two standards, the viability standard and a trimester standard. And then finally, there have been, the Congress passed a partial birth abortion ban act, and that was upheld by the Supreme Court about 10 years ago. And that is fully consistent with Roe because Roe gave states the power to prohibit abortions in the last trimester, but most people aren't aware of that. So that's what I do. I actually talk about one case that's very interesting. It's called the right not to be conceived. People have actually sued on behalf of a fetus who was born with a defect. And that's a fascinating case. So there are many aspects of this case that are quite fascinating.
Wait, people have actually sued because they conceived a child that had a defect?
Yeah, the one suit that is the most famous one was a New York case where the parents sued a doctor for not advising them that they were carriers of a genetic disorder that their children would probably have. And in that case, they prevailed. And it basically, the court didn't say it this way, but the court basically said the fetus has a right not to be conceived. And an interesting case.
You know, I remember in the old days when a man and a woman would go get their marriage license, you had to do the blood test first, and they don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
You know, of course, I think nowadays if you were to do that, you'd have to spend the next 2 months waiting on the genetic results to come back. Yeah, so, but, you know, Mr. Smith, this is such a huge subject, a complicated subject that sometimes it almost falls into the same category, which came first, the chicken or the egg, because we're never really going to know, but where is this actually going to lead to? Now, let me ask you this, because you brought something up. Are there any states right now that, is there an age limit on parental permission, so to speak? How young does, let's say, a young girl have to ask permission to go get an abortion? Is that on some of the books in the states?
It's my understanding that the Supreme Court has ruled, and there is no parental consent required at any age. That's my understanding. That was the Casey case from 1976. So I may be wrong, but that's my understanding.
So a 15-year-old girl gets pregnant by her boyfriend, and she doesn't have to ask her parents for permission to go get an abortion. She can just walk in a particular place and get it done and never say a word.
That's my understanding.
Wow.
So that illustrates the effect this has on family rights. So very interesting.
Well, you keep adding more complication to this, because now there's, you know, family rights in this. You know, it's just, this is why the abortion issue is so big. Again, it's from a court side of things, there's a medical side of things, there's the family side of things, and of course, as your book says, the fetal right to life argument. It's the fetus that we have to truly focus on. And I agree with you. Once that fetus has a heartbeat, it is a human being. And I've seen this, the ultrasounds, like you said, you see them where they're smiling. You know, I've been told by former abortion workers that when those procedures are done, that baby feels the pain. And that is often overlooked. And a lot of people don't realize that it comes down to almost being organ harvesting here in the United States, but they're not going to call it that.
Yeah, you're right. A number of states have considered outlawing, doing something to protect the fetuses from pain. And these laws have not been very successful. In other words, the attempt is, well, we'd like to save the fetus, even if it's been aborted. And as you know, with Governor Northam down there in Virginia, that creates a really sensitive and problematic situation. I mean, abortion is not the right to kill the fetus. So even if there is an abortion, it seems to me there's an obligation to try to protect the fetus itself. So,
well, yeah, absolutely. Well, let me ask you this, because this is almost a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Could overturning Roe v. Wade result in mass protest, and could public reaction influence the court's decision-making process?
I think yes to both of them. I don't care what the court does, there's going to be protests. And unfortunately, I think the court is influenced by public opinion. We like them not to be, but I think they are, some of them. I mean, this is an individual case. But I think the main point of my book is to help people understand the case better. And again, we speak of overturning Roe, but it's not going to be totally overturned. They are not going to get rid of the woman's right to control her body. They may limit it a little, they may put little restrictions, but so the overturning issue is it's so superficial. It's not very helpful.
We want to thank Mr. C. Paul Smith for educating us today on the fetal right to life, and all of my viewers and listeners can get a copy of his very informative book, The Fetal Right to Life Argument. And to get a copy of The Fetal Right to Life Argument, go to cpaulsmith.com. For those of you who are watching my television program, it's there on the bottom of your screen, cpaulsmith.com. And for those of you listening, all you have to do is write down the letter C, paulsmith.com, or also go to drwardbond.com, where we have the link directly to his site so you can purchase his amazing, informative book on this very important subject. We all need to stop talking about Roe versus Wade if we don't know anything about it, but this is going to teach you what Roe versus Wade is actually about and why this abortion issue is so important. So, to get a copy of his book, The Fetal Right to Life Argument, go to cpaulsmith.com, and we will be right back with more right after this.